Hello, welcome to the Getty Museum and today's Art Break. My name is Beth Morrison. I'm Senior Curator of Manuscript, and we're so excited to have you join us. Today's Art Break focuses on one of the great manuscripts in the Getty's collection and looks at how it continues to inspire, I think, all of us today and give us a lot of food for thought. So, as you might know, today's Art Break is called Living Through Hell in the Middle Ages and Today. And I'm your host, Beth Morrison. Joining me for the conversation today will be Ken Turan, film critic of the LA Times and NPR's Morning Edition, and we'll invite him on screen in just a little while. Before we actually get to the program itself, I just wanted to share a couple of housekeeping details. The first is, if you'd like to access live captioning, please just click the CC icon on your Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. And during the entirety of the program, if you want to submit questions, go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit your questions. I'll be keeping an eye on them during the course of the conversation, but we'll also try to get to number them at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to just take you on a really quick journey through this fabulous manuscript to give you an idea of the story and the journey that Don Dahl takes to kind of set the scene for the journey that we're going to be going on today with Ken. So this is the fabulous manuscript called The Visions of the Knight Tondal. It was written out and illuminated around 1470, but the story itself is much older, actually probably dating from around the 9th century. So clearly, even then, centuries later than it was originally written, it was speaking to 15th century audiences, just like it speaks to us today. So I'm going to take you on a really brief vision through the entire manuscript, and then we'll get to the conversation. So the manuscript starts with the image on your left-hand side, which is Tondal suffering a seizure at dinner. And the story is that Tondal is a knight. He's wealthy, he's good looking, he seems to have everything in the world, but he's not a great person. And he's kind of stingy, he doesn't really pay attention to home life. And so one day he goes to collect on a debt to a friend's house, and the friend can't pay the debt. And Tondal says, well, too bad, you really need to pay me. And the friend says, why don't you just stay for dinner? We'll chat about it and we'll come to some kind of agreement. And Tondal reluctantly says yes. So here he is at dinner, and all of a sudden he chokes to death and falls down dead on the floor, which is what you see on the right-hand side. And he's in his body and he sees these devils. And I don't know if you can see them, but they're sort of hovering above the people's heads at the right-hand side. And the devils are going to come down and take his soul away so that his soul will go to hell. And Tondal is so scared that his soul actually refuses to leave his body. So at that moment, his guardian angel comes, and his guardian angel says, listen, I make you a deal. I'm going to take you on a tour of hell and then heaven, and then I'm going to put you back in your body, and you can live the way you want the rest of your life based on this experience. So the first places that Tondal finds are all of these different types of hell. There's a different type of hell for every kind of sin you can imagine. And I'm just going to show you a few. So this is the torment of unbelievers and heretics. And you can see that it's set in this very dark, scary world. And Tondal is the figure located at the far left. He's represented as a nude figure because the soul in the Middle Ages was often represented as nude, having been sort of freed from its worldly possessions and whatnot. And then you see his guardian angel there next to him, talking to him and explaining what's happening. And the text talks about how there's this smell of sulfur and screaming and just claustrophobic terror as all of these demons that you see in these crevices and rocks sort of scoop up people with their hooks and torment them and then throw them into this lake of freezing ice till the souls can't stand it anymore, and they actually ask to be taken out and tortured some more. So like unbelievable torment. Here's another one. This is the beast Acheron. And the beast Acheron, the text talks about the fact that the mouth of this beast, this horrific beast, is so wide that 10,000 knights on horseback lined up side by side could walk through its mouth. That's how big it is. And then you see these sort of two black souls who are impaled on the teeth at the top and bottom. And Tondal is shivering and he says, please don't make me go in there. And the angel says, too bad, you gotta go suffer a little bit. And so he goes inside. But here I want to talk about this artist of this manuscript named Simon Marmion. And you can see the way that he's really looked at fire. You can see that he's seen the different colors of fire, yellow where it's really hot, and then blue as it sort of goes up, and then the rolling eyeballs with the veins in the eyes, all of these kind of incredible details that really make you feel like you're in hell with Tondal. This is one of my favorites. This is the torment of unchaste priests and nuns. And I just want to read you from the text to give you a little sense of what the text itself sounds like. The angel and the soul soon came upon a beast unlike all those they had already seen. This beast had 2 feet and 2 wings, a very long neck, and an iron beak and iron claws. From its jaws, it breathed fire and flame. There it would devour all the souls it could reach. When it had eaten the souls and they had been reduced to nothing in its belly, the beast would defecate, dropping them onto the ice where their torments were renewed. All the souls were thus thrown into the ice and were made pregnant, men as well as women, and there awaited the time when they would give birth. The litter that they had inside them would meantime eat at their entrails. When their time came, they would give birth to hideous serpents, not only through the organ nature ordained for this, but also through their arms and feet. Each of these serpents had an iron beak, which they would tear open from the member that they emerged from. These serpents had sharp and venomous tongues with which they would suck the life out of the souls to the point of death, a death which they continually sought. But it was in vain, because they were dying alive and living dead. So you can just get a sense of how evocative this text is and how the artist has really very literally represented every single thing that you heard me read about. And this, of course, is the torment of unchaste priests and nuns. So they get it really bad. Then Tondal gets to what is essentially purgatory, and that's represented on the left hand of your screen here. And you can see that there's sort of people glued to a wall, and the wall is a wall of those who are bad, but not very bad. And so they don't have the sulfurous smells, and they don't get tormented by demons, but they're literally stuck on this wall, and they're very hungry. And when the rain and the hail come, they can't protect themselves. They just have to sort of deal with it. So that's what you get if you're bad, but not very bad. Then at the end of the manuscript, we get to the visions of heaven and the different types of people who go to heaven. And this is the ultimate heaven that I'm showing you, the last image in the manuscript, which is the wall of metals and jewels surrounding angels and saints. And basically, it's just so good, you just have to imagine what's happening. And one of the things that I think is remarkable about this manuscript is that it's very hard to describe torment and torture and devils and smells, but it's really hard to give a concrete idea of what heaven is like. And so both the text and the artist are like, you have to imagine it. It's just the best thing you can possibly imagine. And so you're faced with this wall of jewels, and you just have to imagine what's happening inside. And as you can imagine, at the end of the story, Tondal reforms all of his evil ways. He's put back in his body. He gives away all of his goods, and he becomes a great person and a great friend, and everybody loves him. And so it's this sort of redemption story for the ages. And it's an allegory of the ways that you can look at your own life and make changes. And that's what Ken and I are going to be discussing today. But before I invite him on screen, we have a special movie for you. This is a project that Ken and I worked on a number of years ago, and it shows you just why Ken considers this manuscript so cinematic. And if you made a big budget blockbuster out of it, this could be the trailer for that movie. So can we bring on the movie?
For the handsome young knight Tondal, it was just another day in the Middle Ages, when life took an unexpected turn.
Lord Tondal!
His guardian angel appeared.
Follow me and remain close.
The angel took Tondal's soul on a harrowing journey through darkness.
Dear master, what did these poor souls do wrong for which I now see them so cruelly tormented?
Remember how you once stole a cow?
Master, I gave it back.
Only when you were no longer able to keep it.
For the sins he had committed in life, the soul endured a little torture. He also met some horrific beasts. Then the angel offered a change of scene, an atmosphere filled with light. Tondal's soul implored the angel to let him stay.
Dear Master, I could stay here forever.
Suddenly, Tondal felt his soul reunited with his body. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor among his old friends. From then on, he turned away from worldly possessions and began to preach the angel's teachings with great devotion.
Thanks so much. That was great. And now I'd like to invite Ken to join me in conversation about this wonderful manuscript.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I think that both of us are just thrilled to have an excuse to talk more about this manuscript.
Absolutely. When Tondal calls, I answer,
That's what we like to hear.
I don't know what else to tell you.
I was thinking, I mean, you and I have actually been talking about this manuscript for probably over a decade, if I'm correct. I'm just wondering, do you remember your first exposure to the manuscript and why it sort of caught your eye?
Yeah, I think you showed it to me. I can't remember what the reason was, but it was so vivid. The images were so strong. It really felt like, the illuminator is one of the great masters of illumination, and you can really see why that's the case. Just a knockout story and just a knockout visualization.
And I think we had such fun working on that movie trailer together. I often wonder, gosh, if Ken Turan had to pick who would play Tondal in the movie version, who would it be?
Well, it might be someone like Tom Hanks. It's in everything. Yes, he's wealthy, but the whole idea of the thing is that this could happen to you. This could happen to anyone. And
yeah.
And
I think that's why it appeals to everyone, and I think that's why, as an allegory, it really works, because it's an experience that we can all. I think we've all had those days when we wake up and we're like, today I'm gonna finish that book, or I'm gonna get that promotion, or what you're sort of resolving to make your life better in whatever way it is. And I think that's something that everyone can very much sort of associate with.
Yeah, no, it fascinated me. I had forgotten that. I mean, my God, the manuscript, the story is from the 9th century. The manuscript is what, 500 years later? I mean, to have a story captivate people for 500 years, I mean, wow.
Yeah, and now we're 500 years past that. So we're sort of, it just continually speaks to people. And I think that one of the things that really appeals to me in it is that you have these scenes of hell that are so incredibly vivid, and they're the ones that really attract your attention. And then you get to heaven, and it does seem a bit boring by comparison. I was going to show some more images. If you have let me just put it back up. Let me share the screen again. Here's, for example, another one, and I think this is one of your favorites, isn't it?
Yes, God, the soup of hell,
The soup of hell, exactly. And the text talks about how you see these people sort of falling from above a great distance, and they land on this enormous griddle. And you can see that the bodies are actually liquefying. It reminds me a little bit of that scene at the end of one of the Terminator movies, where he falls in that liquid metal and he kind of gets absorbed. And the text talks about how when they get melted enough, it's kind of a sieve. And then they just fall into like this hell soup, like you said, that's the red underneath. And I saw that we had a couple of questions in the Q&A about this. And in fact, yes, this text did predate Dante. And there is scholarly conversation about whether Dante sort of took this idea of the different levels of hell from this older sort of visionary literature, like the Knight Tondal. And then somebody else also mentioned Dickens, which is something you and I have talked about, right, Ken?
Yes, I mean, it's amazing how so much of this, when you think of A Christmas Carol, which
Yeah,
is not only very familiar, has been filmed, I don't know, any number of times.
yeah.
And it's a similar story. A soul gets taken out of his body and gets to see things that normal humans don't see. Yes, this is from the 1938 version. Reginald Owen, I think, plays Scrooge, and it's quite a journey. I doubt that Dickens was familiar with Tondal, but this is a classic human situation. We all
Yeah.
want to know what's behind the curtain, as in The Wizard of Oz. We all want to know what after we die, what's going on out there. And
And what are
Tondal,
people going to think of us?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
another aspect of it. And one of the reasons that you and I both like the 1951 and the 1938 version, I think, is in a way because it's black and white, but the way that the cinematographers play with the story in both of them reminds me very much of the Tondal. At the upper left, you can see the one of the ghosts appearing to him in bed, and that sort of great light that comes onto, and then she's in real darkness, and then the sort of ghost that appears, and then down below he's got these guides through these lives, and it very much for me evokes Tondal. And I think you're right, probably Dickens, I mean, who knows, maybe he'd heard of Tondal, but probably not. But I think the treatment of the story is so similar in the 15th century and in 1938, and even today we tend to think of black and white because it's either something good is happening or something bad is happening.
yeah. No, it's quite something to see this, and to see how evocative it is. I do want to, you mentioned it, I want to put in a good word if someone wants to see A Christmas Carol. I think it's 1951 version with Alistair Sim as Scrooge is really the one to see. And we tried to find art from it, and it was elusive. But I'm happy to see Reginald Owen, who's also a terrific actor, getting his turn.
Yeah, the 1951 one is the one that I own as well, that I watch every Christmas. So I'm right with you there, Ken. I did have a couple of these other hell images. And I guess one of the questions I have for you, Ken, is how do you think that, I mean, I know that part of the reason that we're both attracted to the story is this multiplied version of hell. But what is it that you think has this sort of cinematographic quality to it almost?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, first of all, it's a lot of specific, it's very different images. The hell is imagined in great detail. And I love this, different punishments for unchaste priests and heretics and murderers. Everyone gets their own torment. It's not, this version of hell is not a one size fits all hell. This is the opposite of one size fits all. And that kind of the intensity of the imagination it took to think up all these different things and to illustrate them. And that the beast Acheron with that enormous mouth, and you can see souls behind the mouth inside, inside him. Oh, I mean, this is really just incredibly, there it is, incredibly vivid, and someone, I mean, really, it's a cliche to say it, but were this person alive today, there's no doubt that he'd be working in this kind of visual medium. He'd be, working for Marvel or working for, some place that really wanted this kind of overarching imagination. It's quite a feat of imagination to come up with this stuff. I mean, it scares us today. It scares me every once in a while. As I'm looking at this, I kind of look away a little bit. I can't even imagine what it did to people, in the 15th century. We're used to horrific images, and I don't know that they were used to stuff like this. It must have blown people away.
Yeah, I think it did visually, and I think that one of the things that you're reacting to is the fact that Marmion, as an artist, was really able to make it convincing. Like he made it. It's like the special effects of the Middle Ages, right? This is their version, and the way that tongue is coming up, and you can see the root of the tongue, and you can almost imagine Marmion sitting around one day with his wife or whatever. He's like, "Okay, let me see the bottom of your tongue. Just hold it there, and I'll take it." But also the way that he's, those eyes rolling in the head. And then the way that the angel is this sort of luminous presence, almost like that ghost that we saw in the 1938 Christmas Carol, where he's sort of floating there and he looks very much not a part of the world. And that was, all artistic technique to really make that possible.
Yeah, and also, as I look at it, that blue of his costume really pops. That's where your eye goes first. Even though there's a horror there, this, the color that attracts you the most is that blue. It's like the artist is saying, yeah, that stuff is horrible, but the angel is stronger than even that. The angel is, top of the heap. And,
Yeah.
it's done visually very effectively.
And when you get to the heaven scenes, the angel, like you said, literally blends. This is his place. Now it's all about the angel, so that
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
everything, you can barely see him compared to those other images, which I think again is a testament to the artist and what the artist was trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And, I mean, it's the dark stuff. I mean, I interviewed John Huston once near the end of his life, and I asked him about all the darkness in his films, and he looked at me and he said, "The black pearl shines brightest." And I think that's what we're seeing here. I mean, the images we remember are the horrors, the images that draw us back, the images that make this manuscript still alive today are not the visions of heaven, they're the visions of hell.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the reason that this manuscript has more particularly been speaking to me is because of everything that the world has been through in the past 15 months. I felt like I was, in a version of Tandal's life. Then we have the pandemic, then we have the economic crisis, then we have all the turbulence of George Floyd and what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement. Then we had the presidential election and the sort of, trauma around that. And it seemed to replicate Tandal's experience for me, on a kind of one-to-one kind of basis.
Yeah, yeah. And we, like Tandal, I think one of the great lures of this story and one of the reasons we can identify with it now is we all feel and hope we can learn from the bad things that happen to us, that we can, become better people, that we can adapt. With COVID, there's all kinds of, when stories have come out, what I learned during my COVID year, and there's all kinds of people saying, I'm a better person because of this. And we want to feel, and there's no reason we can't feel, that terrible things happening to us can purify us, can make us better people. And that's exactly what happened to Tandal. He was taken on this trip. He saw and experienced awful things. It shook him up, and he said, I'm going to be different. And lo and behold, he was different.
Yeah, and I think I at least myself have been feeling a lot of that kind of determination from people, that having this year really was a very reflective time for many, many people. And the idea was like, yes, let's go out and make the world a better place, whatever that means for people. I want to be a better version of myself. And I hope that energy and that determination continues to inspire people as we move forward.
Yeah, and also, one of the things that happens here, another way to put this is that what Tandal learns is what's important in life. He learns how he's supposed to be when he is alive. This vision of the afterlife really reinforces what he should be doing while he is alive. And I think, again, that's something that we're thinking about as well. What is important in life? What should we be doing given what we're faced with?
And I think that that was not just a personal thing for Tandal, but we've been getting some questions about the manuscript itself. And these initials that are down at the bottom, this big C and M that are joined by a love knot. And this manuscript, we actually know who it was commissioned for. It was commissioned by a woman named Margaret of York, who was the wife of the very, very powerful Duke of Burgundy at this time period. And on the left side of your screen, you have this explicit that says, this here is finished, the story of the Knight Tandal, and it was made for Margaret of York, and then it gives all of her titles. That's most of what you're seeing on the screen there, and then actually gives the date that it was written in. So we have a lot of information about it. And what's intriguing to me is that this manuscript was made for a woman. She was a very devout, but a very devoted wife. She had been married to the Duke of Burgundy for almost like 8 years by the time she had this manuscript. And they didn't have an incredibly happy marriage. She was married to a man named Charles the Bold. And much of their marriage, he was sort of out and about, waging war and trying to build a Burgundian state. And he really came to a point where he was getting the enmity of his people because he was spending so much time on these wars that were very costly and sort of disrupting life. And she was often left at home, and she didn't have any children by him, so she didn't have a family life. And so I just imagine her commissioning this manuscript, and when he comes home from one of his wars, she's like, hey, honey, let's sit down and take a look at this story. It's about a knight who lived a very bad life and then determines that he wants to be better. What do you think? So that's what you're seeing.
One thing we don't know. Yeah. No, I mean, one of the things I'd love to know is how the manuscript, the owner of the manuscript, what she thought of it when she got it. I mean, it would be great to be a fly on the wall when she was presented with the manuscript and looked it over. I assume we have no record of of how she reacted, but that's just
no, but
bad.
You can only imagine that she was quite thrilled with the illuminations and the story that it told, and of course all this laudatory stuff at the end with all of her titles and stuff, no doubt meant something to her as well. But what I love is that like we said, the manuscript was originally written. This is the only fully illuminated copy of this text, even though it had been translated into more than 10 languages in the Middle Ages. This is the only illuminated copy, which I actually find pretty surprising. But it is one of the great sort of masterworks in the Getty's collection. And the fact that, it inspired her 500 years later, and now it's inspiring us 500 years later again, is pretty amazing. And one of the things that I think is really amazing about this manuscript is the wide variety of people that it speaks to. I have been telling Ken recently that I've been contacted by two filmmakers in London who are working on a sort of film made of the Tondal called Tondal Visions of the Night. And it's meant to be played in sort of in a rave kind of atmosphere, in a nightclub with sort of blinking lights and this idea of self-identity and confusion in the modern world and looking for kind of solace in a community, but this community that's very chaotic. I can't sort of wait for this to be done. You can get a sense here of the sort of artist's rendering of what this would be like. And it does really draw on the imagery of the Tondal. So I just love that it's speaking to different contemporary audiences in different ways.
Oh, totally. No, and it's great. But, looking at the manuscript, I'm really hard pressed to think that anything could improve on the vividness and the specificity and the sheer horror of those images. I mean, I always wish filmmakers the best, but I mean, this is tough competition. Going up against Tondal is tough competition.
Indeed. And as we were talking about, I mean, here's just another, so we had the unchaste priests and nuns, and here's the glory of good monks and nuns. And Tondal sees these beautiful tents, but they're not drab because they're so beautiful and pastel, but they don't have that kind of visceral appeal. And the angel says, I'm just going to show you a little bit, but you can't go inside. And again, you're forced to use your imagination of what heaven is like, whereas, the artist was able to do a very good vision of what hell is like. This is Lucifer, and the text talks about how Lucifer is on this sort of griddle chained down, and he's got 1,000 arms, and each 1,000 arms has 20 fingers, and each of the 20 fingers is as long and strong as a knight's lance. And he sort of jabs people with these, talons, and they burst like grapes, the text says. I mean, it's just...
No, they got into it. Well, again, they wanted, they remember Scared Straight. I mean, I think this is, they really did that. This story is meant to scare people straight, to put them on the righteous path, and to really scare them, they've got to be vivid, and, I think psychologically they assume correctly that scaring people with the bad stuff would be they could do that better than they could imagine a heaven that people would say, yeah, it's worth being a good person to get there. I think they put their money on scaring people.
Yeah. I mean, and we had a couple of questions in the Q&A about other sort of hell images, that famous tympana at different medieval cathedrals. And it's not so much that all of the hell imagery is drawn from Tandal as that all of the medieval artists are drawing on this sort of pool of imagery from different areas, and they might not have known the specific manuscript, but there clearly was so much focus, like you said, on this idea of scaring people, that there's all kinds of texts and images of hell from this time period. That's pretty amazing. And it's funny because an enormous thunderstorm just started here in Washington, D.C., and the thunder is rolling across the sky. I feel like I brought it on with our discussion. Let's turn to some questions in the Q&A. Somebody asked about a facsimile of MS-30. All of the images and all of the text pages of the Tandal manuscript are available on the collections page of getty.edu. So you can go there and just type in Tandal, and they will all come up so that you can see them. And somebody is asking about connection or overlap with Bosch. Very good question. Our manuscript has actually been featured in exhibitions on Bosch, because Bosch and he were, again, probably drawing on the same tradition of hell imagery. And Bosch was very much following in the footsteps of this kind of imagery, although we don't know if Bosch himself really did know something about this manuscript. We got a question about the fact what language it is written in Middle French. For those of you who might have recognized some words, if you know. And here's a question for you, Ken. Curious, what about Scorsese's Silence, the searching for Christian faith inward? Would that be off the mark?
Say that again, Beth. I didn't hear you.
Scorsese's Silence. I guess that I'm
Oh,
not
yeah,
familiar
yeah.
with that movie, but
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
asking about parallels.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. You know, there's, you know, the thing about the Tandal manuscript that I think sets it apart is this really strong visualization of the horrors, you know, and other films and other things have talked about the religious experience and varieties of religious experience, but the horrors of this, I think, are really what sets it out and why we're talking about it, you know, hundreds of, you know, 1,000 years after the first story was told and 500 years after the manuscript was eliminated.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Ken, that Marmion just did such a fabulous job of capturing the essence of what it was like to be in hell. But somebody asked if there were a parallel to any movies you can think of that did a particularly good job of envisioning what hell was like.
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, movies, a lot of the scary movies we see really deal with personal things happening. You know, they don't deal so much. I mean, many of today's filmmakers do not have necessarily a religious bent, so they're not interested in depicting hell. You know,
Right.
They're interested in depicting horrors that happen in life or horrors that could happen to you. You know, if you go out on, you know, if you go out to the country with some friends, you know, some maniac might knock on your door, you know, so that's where today's horror is. I mean, I'm sure there are films that have taken shots at depicting hell. You know, I'll tell you, I'm blanking out on the name, but it's an interesting juxtaposition. One of the most horrific films I've seen recently, in the past few years, it won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. I'm blanking out on the name, but it's a film that's set in Auschwitz in the concentration camp. And it's the most vivid depiction of, I believe it was a Czech film, if my memory serves. It probably doesn't, but I'm sure people will correct me. But that was a vision of hell on earth. And there was a lot of fire and a lot of chaos. It shared things with the Tandal manuscript. So that's the one I think of in terms of films that have come closest to this.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that, you know, when we think of modern versions of what it's like to live through hell, something like Auschwitz is going to be very, very close, unfortunately. It's just, you know, you read about the experiences that people had there, and you can imagine that it would be a sort of modern version of what we're seeing here in this manuscript. There's a couple more questions. Where was the manuscript found? On the same page on getty.edu, you can read the entire provenance of the manuscript from the time it was created. until it entered the Getty Museum. I think it entered the Getty in '87 or something. So it's been at the Getty for quite a while. And then why is some of the text red? Interesting question. Let me see if I can go back to what someone is referring to. A full page. If I can find one. Yes. So what you're seeing here is at the beginning of the manuscript on the right-hand side, this is called a rubric. And it's written in red, and it was really a sort of way of dividing up chapters or portions of the text, giving you a little sort of summary or preview of what's going to happen in the text that then is in black. And so, for instance, this reads, here begins the book of the knight and great lord of Ireland, and he was named Monsieur Tondal. And then it talks about what's going to happen in the story. So yeah, it's like a little summary. And then somebody was talking about the border decorations, which are these beautiful border decorations that were quite common in 15th century manuscripts with the initials of Charles and Margaret. And then you might have seen in the corners, she had a motto, which was "Good will come of it." So that's what you see sort of on these banderoles in the borders. We had a question. Margaret commissioned this manuscript and the illuminations, meaning that she knew and or wanted to be herself scared by the possibility of going to hell. She herself was very devout. In other words, was there really an intended audience for these illuminations other than Margaret? It's a really interesting question. We don't quite know exactly always how these manuscripts were used. I'm sure that she showed it to her husband, and her husband himself, Charles the Bold, was known for having a portion of history. He had an amazing collection of manuscripts inherited from his father, big, huge manuscripts. And this manuscript, I should have said, is quite large itself. It's about 1 foot high. So you could see it being shared with people. You could see people, multiple people looking at the illuminations at once. And Charles the Bold, it was recorded, had a portion of history read aloud to him every night by a professional reader, and he was no doubt looking at the illuminations, sharing them with his friends. So even though we don't know exactly who was using this, we think the audience was more than just Margaret herself. But yes, she was very devout, and I think, you know, like you said, Ken, a little scaring about hell is a good way to start living a better life. Are there any other Marmion illuminated works? Yes, there are quite a number of works by Marmion, really beautiful ones. The Getty has at least one other that I can think of, but his oeuvre was actually pretty extensive. And if you look him up, I think there's probably even a Wikipedia page that maybe mentions some of his works of art. Someone came in, the Hungarian film about Auschwitz, they think was named Son of Saul. Does that sound right, Ken?
That is correct. That is correct. And it was Hungarian. I'm sorry I said it was Czech. I mean, I knew I was getting everything wrong, but the images were so strong, I wanted to talk about it, even though I knew I was going to sound foolish because I couldn't remember the specifics. But it is Son of Saul. It is Hungarian. And it feels like hell. You know, it feels like hell as much as any film I've seen.
Yeah. And somebody asked sort of a related question, why do you think it's so easy to come up with so many varied and creative images of hell, but not so much of heaven? And I think that is very much mirrored by contemporary, you know, movie society even, Ken. I mean, think about horror movies and thriller movies and all the different movies where things go wrong, but there's not really a great desire for a movie where everything's perfect all the way through.
It's harder to do that. I mean, it's harder to do that. And also, it's almost on some circles, it has a bad reputation. It's almost like the darkness is what you're supposed to be dealing with. That if you're dealing with something good, you're just somehow kind of, you know, you're not at the top of your form. You know, that the stuff that has the darkness is what has meaning. You know, and there's a feeling in the culture that lightness doesn't have meaning. Lightness is pablum for, you know, juveniles. And I don't happen to agree with that, but I mean, the culture really is telling us that the darkness is where people want to live. The darkness is what's of interest.
Yeah, and I think that's even more true nowadays, where it's all about the sort of hero that is pretty dark themselves and has real character flaws. That's the sort of new way that we've been seeing all of the heroes in movie go, that they're not, you know, it's not Sir Galahad anymore, who is a virtuous, perfect person. They, you know, the hero is an alcoholic, or, was a criminal in their past, or, is secretly living a different life or something like that. So I think there's just more sort of desire in or I don't know. I think it's really easy for all of us to, if I just said, Ken, name 20 really horrible ways you can suffer. And then I said, name 20 great ways you can, be great. And you'd be like, well, pleasure, I happen to love candy. I don't know. It's a little, it's not as exciting.
No, it's true, but I mean, even in literature, sometimes tastes change. I mean, in the Victorian England, which was a great age of the English novel, most of the novels were positive. Dickens, Trollope, even earlier Jane Austen. But we don't. Those kind of novels aren't really written today, or if they're written, they're not really necessarily always get the kind of respect that the novels that go to the dark side do. So cultures change.
Yeah. We have another question for you, Ken. Are there any films set in medieval times with similar themes that you would recommend for people to watch?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a film that I can't recommend because I haven't seen it, but it's interesting given this conversation that it's out there. I don't know anything about it. It's called The Green Knight. It just came out. It's a visualization of the poem that we all read in high school or college, so Gawain and the Green Knight. And I don't know if it's any good or not. Frankly, I haven't seen it, but it's interesting that it's a dark film and it's set in the Middle Ages. There's a film coming out called The Duel, directed by Ridley Scott, set in the Middle Ages, which looks like it's gonna, it's got a lot of, anguish, not quite the supernatural anguish that the Green Knight has, but the Middle Ages is a time that seems to interest us continually. It ebbs and flows, but we never lose interest totally. It's like the Western. It's a era that we return to because it fascinates us.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to both of those movies. I'm hoping it will be a kind of revival for medieval themes, which I think will be good for people who are interested in manuscripts to get a glimpse of how different directors are sort of trying to recreate that time period. I have another good question here. When will the manuscript be on view at the Getty? It's not currently on view, and I don't think we have it scheduled for anytime soon, but you can always check back on the Getty website to see when it's going to come up. Somebody asked, what are the medium of the paintings? It's actually tempera colors on parchment. So everything, the nice white that you see of the sort of support, that's not paper. It's actually animal skin parchment. And the colors are made out of organic materials mixed with a type of egg white that's formed that makes glare that is used for the paint. And we also have a video online that you can find that takes you through the whole process of creation of manuscripts, which I really recommend. How much freedom did the artist have in coming up with the imagery? Was it dictated by the person who commissioned it, or it was collaborative in some sense? Excellent question, something that art historians love sort of like discussing and fighting about with absolutely no answer. But it is interesting to think about the fact that a lot of these artists, like Simon Marmion was someone who worked very closely with members of the nobility, probably came to know them as people. And so even though Margaret probably was not sitting down like, I want Tondal in the middle of the table and he's got to be dressed in a red tunic, and she wasn't dictating it like that. But there probably was an agreement, a contract for the manuscript that indicated how much could be spent on it. And then the artist was also sort of responsible for making sure that there was the right number of illuminations and that there was the amount of gold that they had agreed to and all of that. So I guess you could say it was a collaborative process a little bit, but unfortunately we just don't have that much information on how that worked. Let's see. Another question for Ken. It's a Wonderful Life is a journey film as well, looking at the world without means that one can change one's behavior. Do you have any thoughts about that in terms of a parallel?
Yeah, no, I thought about that. It crossed my mind, along with A Christmas Carol. Yeah, I mean, this is something that we just want to believe that we're going to have a second chance in life, and we also, it's important one of the things that makes that film so satisfying to audiences is the sense that you can do it over. You're not stuck in your past mistakes. You can come to a realization, and everything. Again, once upon a time stories, they always work because they mostly have happy endings. Everyone does. All films obviously these days don't have happy endings anymore, and sometimes happy endings are in disrepute. Sometimes I see a film where you can feel that the story demands a happy ending and the creator doesn't want to give one. So it's like there's this tension between, well, I'm not going to give a classic happy ending. I'm just not going to do it. That's a cop out. But some stories really want a happy ending, and these kind of stories really do want a happy ending. Belief that there's a do-over, belief that we can learn from our mistakes, belief that we should appreciate what we don't appreciate. That's one of the great themes in It's a Wonderful Life. The Jimmy Stewart character didn't realize the good that he'd done and the positive things that had been happening in his life. He was just caught up in worry. It's almost the anti-Tondal. It says, don't worry, be happy. It doesn't say, horrors await you if you don't shape up. It said, don't worry, be happy. So it's an interesting parallel.
Well, I think that's a great note for us to end on today, our own happy ending here. We'll leave Tondal and the rest of the world, including the two of us, to mediate on and meditate on what we want for the future of our world in the rest of 2021. I want to thank Ken so much. It's always so much fun to have a conversation, to hear your thoughts. I think it's endlessly entertaining to talk with you about this manuscript.
Oh, I feel likewise talking to you. You know so much about it, Beth. It's a pleasure to hear you talk about it. It's a fascinating. This is fascinating people for 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a long time, so it's great to have the chance to talk about it again.
And it's great that I think it continues to speak to people, and that's really what we want our collection to do. So thank you all in the audience today for joining us. This program is recorded, so tell your friends about it. They can find it in a week or so on the Getty website. And we also have an exciting program coming up in September, which you can see on the screen today. So please join us for the next art program, and that will be it for today. Bye.